I'm Charlie Simons. This is Do Not Talk, where we talk about the two things you're never supposed to talk about: religion and politics. So, what's really going on in Ukraine? What's really happening with Russia? What's going on with NATO? Now, I got military experience, and I know a lot of people also in the military, and of course, we're talking about it. But there's a friend of mine who yesterday he got on the phone with me, and we were talking about this, and he threw something out there that went, it's so obvious. I can't even. Why didn't I think of that? I mean, it's just so obvious. Why are we sending tanks to the Ukraine? Hello, buddy.
Hey, how are you doing, Charlie?
So why are we sending tanks to the Ukraine?
Well, I don't know exactly why we're sending tanks to Ukraine, but this is what I would be very concerned about. When we send tanks to the Ukraine, each Abrams tank is going to need 3 to 4 people to repair it and maintain it, and then it's going to probably take a couple people to crew it. Now, the U.S. military has said that they want the Ukrainians to go on maneuvers and start fighting back in May. So that's like 3 to 4 months from now. So basically, those Ukrainians are going to have to learn how to maintain a jet turbine tank with gyro stabilizers and a 105 millimeter smoothbore gun.
Well, I'm sorry.
And train up on it.
I'm sorry. What's the engine in the M1 Abrams?
It's a turbofan, or turbo engine, like a jet. So it's very complex.
So, in other words, you can't just get in, step on the gas pedal, and make it go, and then pull the trigger like in the movies, and the bullet comes flying out, or whatever you want to call it.
Well,
it's intricate.
Well, and so when you go to war, things break. And so part of the thing that I think is really important is if you bought a Mercedes-Benz and you had to go find someone to work on it, you're not getting a Mercedes-Benz guy that's going to come work on your car without about a year or two of training. So if you're going to go to war, you want those tanks to work well. So the 3 to 4 people that are going to make that tank work are really important if we're going to war in May.
We're not the only ones sending tanks to the Ukraine, though.
That's correct.
Who else?
So the British have a tank called the Challenger 2. It's a tank that's probably comparable to the M1 Abrams. Then the Germans have what may be one of the best tanks in the world right now. It's called the Leopard 2, not to disparage the M1 Abrams. But the point is all of those tanks will need at least 3 to 5 folks that will be making sure the treads stay on, the engines turn on, and the systems work. And
so only 31 are actually coming from us. And it's going to be real easy to just fly them right in, right?
I have a feeling that those will have to be flown in on a very limited amount of planes that we have to do that, or they may come from a NATO storage depot somewhere in Europe. But I think the thing that I kind of go back to is, so I have a friend of mine, Frank, who is a Audi technician that makes your Audi car run, and it's taken him several years to learn how to do that.
Well, let's talk to Frank about that. Hey, Frank, what's up, buddy? Hello. So exactly how long does it take you to become the level you are with a finely tuned, intricately designed and built machine like an Audi?
So I've been turning a wrench for over 20 years. And just to get certified was an 8-month process. And that was after I had already done schooling and certifications.
Well, and you were also certified with General Motors before that, so you were no slouch.
Yes.
I mean, you knew what you were doing.
Yes.
But you had to be to Audi standards
Yes.
now. Well, this Abrams tank with a jet engine in it, you can't just plop them down there and go, okay, here you go, right?
Definitely not. No, even if you worked on cars before, to go from one brand to another takes not only the training aspect, but the experience aspect. There's so much in the experience that you just have to learn by doing, and you don't learn that overnight. You don't learn that in a simple training exercise.
Certainly not. Well, thank you for that. And I'm just trying to drive the point. This is not going to be real simple. We're sending 31 tanks over. Hey, I'll tell you what, why don't we just give them a one-way ticket to Afghanistan and they can pick out all the equipment
We still would have to train them and repair them. And then, so I think there's 2 issues. One is there's this repair issue. When you go to war, things get broken. And if you're fighting people, you need to get them fixed quickly. The secondary issue is you got to train them to drive it around. And to Charlie's point, you don't hop in and hit the gas because there's a bunch of things attached to it. The other thing I'm super concerned about is, so we have to send somebody over there to teach the Ukrainians how to use it. Obviously, it's going to take some time because they speak one language, we speak another. So you have to put all the tanks at a base. And whether the M1 Abrams are in one place and then the other NATO folks have their tanks in other places.
Well, hopefully the Russians don't have any access to satellites, so they won't be able to tell where the tanks are.
You had to say that. So the important point is that's going to have a big bullseye on it. And so the Russians are going to want to shoot at that as the forces are collected in a logistics moment to keep them going.
Well, Putin, the president of Russia, has already said, if he has to go nuclear, he's going to do it. So you got a whole bunch of tanks from all these different countries in one place while everybody's getting all geared up for some kind of whatever's going to happen in May. He'd just drop a nuke on that, wouldn't he now?
So I think that is probable. And I also think that it's very probable that there will be a lot of NATO soldiers there making sure, because when you do training, the tanks are going to be running every day, so they're going to break and they're going to have to be fixed. And a turbine engine can only run for so many hours before it has to get fixed.
Yeah. The tanks that are going from all these different countries, we're the only ones that have one that's got a jet
I
engine.
believe that neither of the other tanks do. I'm only sort of an
Just
expert
diesel, most of
on
them.
American tanks, yeah. But they're still complex, right? I mean, it's
Yeah, of
not to
course.
mean anything. Audi's a really nice car. I don't own one because I'm poor. But for people who can afford Audis, like my friend Frank, they're really expensive to maintain.
Can't you hook up your buddies here, Frank? Come on.
Yeah, sure. Just hook us up with an Audi, $100,000 car. I don't have one. I have an old Chevy truck and an old GMC SUV because I'm not rich. But the point is if you have a Leopard 2, a Challenger 2, or an M1 Abrams, you're basically buying Audi, Porsche, Mercedes-Benz. It's going to take some time for those guys to learn how to put them together.
Obviously. Now, here's the point Kevin made yesterday that blew me away that I hadn't even considered. Now, I've had so many people, media and conspiracy theorists and all this kind of stuff, which is funny because all those conspiracy theories from 6 months ago have all come true. But they're all saying our own government wants us to get into a war for several different reasons, and depending on who you're talking to, how they pontificate, some are literally just to control the population. Take out a couple of million here in some kind of nuclear war. Wow, they're doing the job for us. It's wicked. It's sick to even consider that our own government would be that horribly cruel. But at this point, I'm getting to a place in a mindset that I wouldn't be surprised at any of it now. You said something.
So I think if a rational fear about how this could escalate would be, we put tanks on trucks or trains or planes and fly them to Ukraine with 3 to 5 people to maintain them and a couple of people to train people. So you got 31 tanks. If you're going to actually maintain all 31 tanks and get them ready for war by May, each tank has to have 3 guys. You're not sending 3 guys for all the tanks. So that's 60 guys, 90 guys, gals to maintain it, plus all the equipment to do it, plus some amount of training. So at the end of the day, you could have 100 guys just maintaining tanks over there for this battalion, not including the rest of the folks.
Doesn't that mean that we, even though are absolutely without question the worst president this country's ever had, even though he has said, whoa, no, we're never going to put boots on the ground there,
Well,
doesn't that put boots on the ground?
There's no way you're going to teach people how to maintain a tank by Zoom. And you're definitely not going to teach people how to drive a tank by Zoom, especially if they use another language. So there's going to be at least 90 people to maintain those tanks if we really want to go to war in May, and then you're going to have so many trainers. But my thought is if there's a breakout attack where the Russians break through, now all of a sudden we've got this choice. Let the Russians capture some of these tanks and the men, or we put guys in those tanks, American soldiers, German soldiers, NATO soldiers in these tanks, and fight the Russians. Because I think what could happen is you're going to have these areas of concentration where our tanks are concentrated, where they're able to do the training and the support and keep them running, and then the Russians attack, blow through, and now there's this idea that we could put guys on planes, fly them there, put them in the tanks, and they fight back. That's scary to me. But I also think the other option, which is something I think Charlie or Frank brought up, is you put all the tanks in one area, somebody shoots where all the tanks are. And there'll be American soldiers teaching and making sure that stuff works and those guys understand it. So I think this is not good. I'm not a Putin guy, but I'm pretty sure that this is not a step we want.
To do with supporting Russia or the president of Russia, not one bit. To me, the question that's just glaringly obvious is, this is the Ukraine. Yes, they supply a lot of wheat to Europe. Yes, their agricultural contribution to especially Europe and feeding so many different countries with their wealth of farmland is important. But why are we committing troops and equipment to defend a small country that doesn't? I don't understand why we're getting involved. That has nothing to do with me being pro-Putin, pro-Russia. It's pro-United States of America.
Well, so Charlie, there's another issue too. So the southern part of Ukraine, just north of the Russian port, in the south part of Ukraine, which was Ukraine, it's now Russia. There's huge oil fields there. And so one of the things that nobody's talking about is basically where the gas comes from that powers Europe. And for many years, it's basically come from Russia because the Russian fields are developed and the Ukrainian country is fairly corrupt, and it's a longer haul to bring that natural gas and oil from the south part of Ukraine. Well, the place that the Russians have taken over is basically where those fields are. And part of the message is we sell oil to Europe. Ukraine, you won't. You will sell sunflower oil or sunflower seeds and wheat, but your natural gas, you need to keep it there. So at the end of the day, what I would say is the reason why we're going to war is because the Germans don't seem to be willing to fight for their energy supply. And that's the thing that bugs me the most. The Soviet Union has a GDP of 2 trillion, had a GDP of 2 trillion, but the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. It broke up in 91. The country we are fighting now is Russia. It is not the Soviet Union. And yeah, they may have nuclear weapons, but the Russian GDP is only $2 trillion. It's half. The GDP of Russia is half that of Germany.
They're not a formidable foe. They really truly aren't. And in many ways, they are. There is no comparison between them and us.
Right.
That's an easy fight. However, they've buddied up with China quite well, haven't they?
Well, they have, but I mean, the way I got to flip this back on Russia. Russia and Spain have the same size economy at about $2 trillion a year. The Russian military is large in some respects, but they can't bring in the kind of force projection that we can. And so the idea that we need to be afraid of the Russians is silly, and the idea that we need to go fight in Ukraine is silly because the Germans have an economy that's twice as big as Russia. The French have an economy that's twice as large as the Russians.
Yeah, they should let NATO take care of it.
And Ukraine has something that's the UK has an economy that's twice as big as the Russians.
You know what I truly believe? I truly believe the reason why we're so involved in this is because we have a very weak, hapless president who obviously somebody behind the scenes is pulling the strings. He's never been smart enough to pull off these kind of things that he's doing. And never in his half a century of service to the United States of America. Here's what I say, Kevin. The United States of America, for the most part, we Americans, if we're in a military conflict, we stick with the horse that we're on. We don't change horses midstream. I think this is really seriously, I could see the current administration getting us into a horrible war like this just so they can maintain power and make sure that we're not going to change horses midstream come 2024. Do you think that's possible?
Charlie, I'm not sure how to comment on that because I think anything's possible. My biggest fear is if all of a sudden we called India and said, hey, we got a problem on our southern border, send us help, it's essentially the equivalent of what the Germans, the French, and the UK are doing right now. They're basically saying, look, we got this thing called NATO and it's supposed to fight the Soviet Union and you need to come help us. And my response would be, the Soviet Union ceased to exist in about 91, 92. You're fighting Russia. They are half to a third of the size of Germany and France in terms of GDP. The French have nuclear weapons, the United Kingdom has nuclear weapons, and there's plenty of young boys for them to go fight for the oil and gas that Germany, France, and the United Kingdom use. We don't need to be there.
And we certainly don't need our equipment there in our M1 Abrams, which Audi doesn't make those, do they?
No, we don't.
No, okay,
No,
all right.
not yet,
Yeah,
anyways.
Gotcha. Thank you, Frank. Yeah. Thank you, Kevin.
Sure.
There's one more thing that Kevin brought up too, and it was now we have tanks over there. We have tanks on the ground, and we're ready for a full assault. Driving Russia out of the Ukraine, and a lot of people are going, yeah. Why? Why is this happening? Don't we have enough problems of our own? But it makes sense. I mean, why would you amass that kind of force and send these things over in advance and go, well, we're just helping out. It's just the equipment. We know now it's not just the equipment because we're going to have boots on the ground just to train the people who are going to be driving them and to train for who knows how long to teach them how to work on them in a language that they don't speak. I don't know how many Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines speak Russian or Ukrainian. It's probably kind of limited. That's Do Not Talk. I'm Charlie Simons. Just wanted to throw this out here. I think it's a very important discussion.